Hi, today I want to talk about two common German sentence structures that can sometimes be a little difficult for beginners. Those
So what
in
we're
the
going to talk about
A1,
today
A2 bracket are verb brackets and subordinate clauses. I'll explain both of those, as we go a little bit. You'll notice I'm using a software called
I like
Word
the
Brewery to
software
pull up all these
because it's
sentences.
sentence-based.
All the sources come from the news. It's fairly immediate with my internet connection. I have a basic, internet connection, nothing fancy. This sentence has both topics that we're going to be discussing. Europa muss jetzt beweisen, dass es funktioniert. So the sentence means that Europe must prove, or must now prove, that it works. Now, we don't need to know what it is or anything, right? We're just doing a sentence model. Okay, so here we have the subject, Europa, muss, verb 1, jetzt, now, beweisen, verb 2, which means to prove. Then we have, let's just stop there and do this verb bracket first. So muss is the first verb that we see. It's the verb that conjugates, that changes. Its form is based on the noun, the subject, Europa. Beweisen here is in its dictionary form. It hasn't changed at all. Okay? So this is the equivalent of saying, in this case, Europe must prove. It's in the present tense. Very simple construction, and it's a verb bracket. So what you'll see here and in other examples is that in this case, when the clause is independent, it can stand alone by itself. The verb will always come second. The verb that conjugates will always come second, and the verb that doesn't conjugate, that's in a fixed form, will come at the very end of the clause, at the very end of the sentence, okay? So here the clause, it ends with a comma, not a period, because we have a second part, so it's right before the comma, okay? So second part is a subordinate clause. It cannot stand alone. This is saying that it functions, right, as a literal translation, but that doesn't make any sense by itself. Like, what is it? What is functioning? What is it connected to, So a subordinate clause cannot stand alone, so it has a special structure. Here you'll see das is the first word, right, in the sentence. Then es is the first word. Es is not a verb. Es is not a verb. It is a pronoun, and it is a subject. And funktioniert is the verb, right? Well, it's at the end. It's not in the second position. That's weird, right? So funktioniert is in the last position because the clause is subordinate. It's the only reason, okay? So the verb that conjugates, if it's in a subordinate clause, will come at the very end. This is often very difficult for beginners to kind of master, especially if you speak English, because, you want the verb to go closer to the beginning of the sentence, right? And that's just not the case in German. And it'll get more complex as you learn more verb forms. But it's just important to remember that in subordinate clause, verb comes at the end, okay? Good. Let's look at another example. This is an example of the brackets again, right? Sie hatte zuerst ihr Gepäck aus dem Zug gehoben. Now, how would you translate this in English, right? Her luggage from the train. Or you could say she had first lifted her luggage from the train. Now that second, this is the past perfect tense. We have hatte, which is the verb, and then we have gehoben at the end. So we have a bracket here, once again. We have sie, which is German pronoun. Hatte, verb 1, zuerst, adverb, first. Ihr Gepäck, direct object. It's whatever she has lifted, right? Aus dem Zug is a prepositional phrase. Aus takes the dative form, so der becomes dem, okay? And the article das also becomes dem. I know that cases can be confusing. Just remember that in this case, aus it takes dative. So it'll take dative, and you can just remember that aus and dative go together, okay? Then gehoben, we have the final verb. So this is another example of that bracket structure. It's very, very common because German has several verb forms that have more than one verb involved. So this is a very, essential verb form, and if you haven't mastered it yet, practice it a lot. Now I'm going to show you what happens when you have two verbs in a subordinate clause, okay? Now that we've covered, the two verb bracket thing quite a bit. So here we have a sentence, Geld und Bildung haben gemein, dass man im Grunde nicht genug von ihnen haben kann. So Geld und Bildung, money and education, Haben gemein, have in common. So that's a verb and a adverb. Okay. Das, here we start the subordinate clause. Man, subject, im Grunde, prepositional phrase, nie genug, not enough, okay. Adverbial. Von ihnen, prepositional phrase again. Haben kann. There we have the verbs. So what does this all mean? Money and education have one thing in common, that one never has enough of them. That's the full phrase. And the last part is that never has of them, never enough of them has can, is the literal word-by-word translation. Okay, it's very awkward in English. But here we see we have das, the first word, then we have a ton of stuff in the middle before we get to the verbs, right? We have the subject, we have prepositional phrases, adverbs, all that's in the middle. Then we have haben, okay? Haben is normally going to be last in the sentence if this was an independent clause. If you had man kann im Grunde nie genug von ihnen haben, man never has enough of them, then one never has enough of them, then, you know, haben would be at the end. But why is kann at the end, right? Kann is at the end because it is the conjugated verb. It is a verb that changes. In a subordinate clause, that verb always goes at the end, okay? So that's important to remember. Here you can see even when there's two verbs involved, the final verb is the one that conjugates. And this is a really essential structure in German because you're going to be using things like because or weil a lot. You're going to be explaining yourself. You're going to be using a lot of these subordinate clauses, and it's very hard for native English speakers to put the verb at the end. I know because I'm also learning Hindi, and it's a killer for me doing that all the time. Doing it in German becomes a habit when you practice it, right? So I would suggest practicing this in front of a mirror. Practice talking to yourself in front of a mirror. That usually helps me kind of memorize things. Read a lot. See if you can create your own sentences with this construct, and it'll be much easier. So just to review, I'll go back to the first sentence because it's simple. We can see we've talked about the verb brackets where you have one verb in the second position, one verb at the end. And then we've talked about what happens in a subordinate clause to the verb. What happens? It goes to the very end of the sentence, very end of the clause. Okay? So I hope this has been helpful. Please let me know in the comments below what you think if you're having any other issues with these two forms. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.